These passages I'm reading are from the NIV, if you want to look them up for yourself. So the first passage is Hebrews 12, 7 through 12. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? Our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. I like this passage, and I definitely think that this passage should be exegeted a lot more so than I'm going to, but I think this passage really just serves to show that sometimes God needs to kick our butts if we are committed followers of Christ, if we are really followers and lovers of Jesus. Then because we're his children, because we belong to him, if we do stupid things, sometimes he needs to punish us. Sometimes he needs to get in our face about that. And kind of going along with that passage, and I'll come back to this later, Psalm 32, 1 through 6. This is what it says. 1 through 5, actually. Blessed is he whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord does not count against him, and whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was sapped, as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgression to the Lord, and he forgave the guilt of my sin. So when I read that passage, honestly, that really sounds to me like the psalmist, I believe it's David, is saying, he messed up, he acknowledges that, and God punished him. It says in verse 3 that he was groaning all day long. And then in verse 5 he says, then I acknowledge my sin to you, and did not cover up my iniquity, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. So to me, I read that, and I interpret that as David screwed up, David sinned, God allowed David to suffer because that was a part of David feeling the guilt of his sin. And then David confessed it, and he was healed. That's how I look at that. Another passage is Matthew 16:24, and that says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I think that's one of those verses that most Christians know, and they just kind of spit it off like, okay, pick up my cross, deny myself, follow me, yeah, whatever, and then kind of go on. And until about 2 or 3 months ago, that was how I looked at this verse too. But then one day one of my professors read this verse in class, and he said, simply, but I think very rightly and wisely, he said, essentially what Jesus is doing, he's inviting his disciples to a crucifixion. And a crucifixion is anything but easy or pain-free or anything. If you've been a follower of Christ, if you've been a disciple of Jesus, whatever you want to call it, any great length of time, or even maybe in a few months, maybe you're a new believer, maybe you've just been getting serious about your faith recently. I don't know. But if that is true, and you are a follower of Christ, you know that, and as this verse says, the life that Christ planned for his followers is not a life without pain, a life without suffering. It's not this life of prosperity and wealth and health like so many megachurches try to portray. And that's not what the Bible teaches. That is not at all what the Bible teaches. In fact, the Bible teaches, especially in verses like this and a few other verses I'll get to later, quite the opposite. In Romans 8, Paul talks about suffering, and he says, I believe that the sufferings of this life are not worth comparing to the future glory that is ahead of us. And I butchered that, but you know the passage. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Oswald Chambers is another really wise theologian that I really respect. And he has a devotional called My Utmost for His Highest. You probably know about it. If you don't, you really should check it out. I think it's awesome. And one thing he said in that, and this is the devotional from August 2nd, sorry. He says, God does not give us overcoming life. He gives us life as we overcome. The strain is the strength. Jesus doesn't give us power to enjoy life without pain, without suffering. In fact, far from it. What he does give us, as Oswald Chambers says, is he gives us the power to overcome as we struggle through it, as we depend on Jesus, as we look to him, as we depend on his Spirit, as we surrender our lives to his will. Isaiah 55 says, your thoughts are higher than my thoughts, as the heavens are higher than the earth. As we acknowledge that, he gives us the strength to endure the pain so that we'll be stronger in the future. 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. He says, to keep me from becoming conceited, because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded it with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest in me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, and insults, and hardships, and persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Again, going back to what Oswald Chambers says, the strain is the strength. Paul says, when I am weak, I am strong. When we go through pain, when we go through suffering, we know that we can be strong, and we know that sometimes it is part of God's plan, because he gives us that strength, as Paul said here, to overcome. And notice what Paul says in verse 8. He pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take this away. Take away that thorn in the flesh, whatever it was. But God said in response, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. He didn't take that thorn away. That's what's really critical about this passage. He didn't take the thorn away. He saw Paul, he saw his pleading, he saw his pain, and he said, I am enough. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And in verse 10, again, he says, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insult and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul sees the value of pain because he knows that Christ is strengthening him through this pain, through this hardship.